So there's an interesting thing someone brought up that is a weird thing that I already see people really like. The whole idea of it just feels so wrong to the way they look at things. But it's a topic about video games should be getting better as technology improves. With their point being that the idea that Zelda Tears of the Kingdom can be rated less than Ocarina of Time, which came out way before on the N64, they feel like games have to be improving and we're not stagnating or getting worse at some point. But it's like, that's not how art or games work, and I don't really see that kind of logic applied to films. People are judging a game based on what exactly it specifically does, although some people do comparison. But just because a game is made later with more technological advancement, doesn't necessarily mean the new stuff is necessarily better. So just because someone prefers Ocarina of Time, it doesn't necessarily mean that the stuff afterwards are bad or that it has to be better because it's better technology. Just like how a remake isn't inherently better to the original. So it's like a weird idea that, oh, the later thing has to be better because what are we doing here? But not necessarily the case. Like, some things just don't necessarily work when it comes to new ideas. Like, some things are cool ideas that have proper execution, or some things get proper execution down the road and not necessarily when they first do it. It's a long-running franchise like Final Fantasy, for example. We're currently on Final Fantasy 16 for land entries. 16 does many great technological feats with its entire game that is really cool. But it also has combat that doesn't get taken full advantage of because of the enemy design. And it also has the giant fights that aren't that good to play because of how slow and clunky they feel. So it's just a whole entire weird thing where, okay, technological feat, you're doing a lot of things graphically that are insane. But gameplay-wise, it's not exactly there. The side quests aren't that great to play. I feel they're good narrative-wise. The main story isn't that good, but it's like a lot of crazy stuff technological-wise. Like how, let's say, during the advent of 3D gaming in the PS1 era, there are many companies and the media critics that were like, hey, this game looks better just because it's in 3D and this is a new advancement technology. Did the game play better? I mean, there were outlets that were like, oh, Castlevania Symphony of the Night looks ugly compared to Castlevania 64 because of the fact that one's in 2D, one's in 3D. Because Castlevania 64 necessarily look bad? No, but the fact that technological-wise, yeah, it's impressive trying to make things in 3D, but it doesn't look as interesting as Symphony of the Night's freaking 2D art style and what it was going for. So just because Castlevania 64 was newer, necessarily meant that it was the better one just because of that factor. It's a Final Fantasy example. Many people enjoy Final Fantasy VII as their favorite entry, and for some people, they say, oh, it's the first one they played, or because of the visual, the look, and a technological leap, but it's also equally find people who prefer Final Fantasy VI, which doesn't have a technological leap, but hey, has multiple parts, has like 12 party members, has big world, second half of the game is chock full of side content for you to do, and stuff like that. I prefer Final Fantasy V, which did have technological leaps, in fact, of animated sprites for the cutscenes, multi-phase final boss, stuff like that, but people just see it as, oh, the gameplay is cool for that game, but don't care for the story, so they don't prefer it. They prefer Final Fantasy IV, which had a more streamlined experience with the whole entire gameplay, but more interesting story, more interesting narrative, even if it did heavily rely on the main character Cecil for the story compared to other characters. Let's look at the Mega Man franchise. A lot of people like, oh, classic Mega Man, but some people don't care for the X series, or the Legend series, or ZX, or Battle Network, or Star Force, even though others came later, so you think, oh, by default, they'd be the better versions, but no, they're just so radically different from each other in the way they kind of play. Or how people being like, oh, I like classic Mega Man, but they'll say, like Mega Man 2 specifically, which is great for them. Mega Man 2, pretty mega game, but some people are like, I don't really care much for the later classic Mega Man games like 4, 5, and 6. Some people don't really care for Mega Man 7. Some people like how Mega Man 8 looks and nothing else. And stuff like that, where it's like, just because later entry came in with better technology doesn't necessarily mean it's the better game, because it's the execution of how it all goes down. Better technology and stuff doesn't mean better execution, and people who are experts in their crafts can make mistakes. They're not perfect. Mistakes can be made, and it's one of those things where it's weird to ask, but people say you shouldn't question this person's logic or advice because they're an expert in their field. Okay, but you're also human. Humans can make mistakes. Hideo Kojima can make mistakes with some of his games, but just because he's an expert doesn't necessarily mean he's all perfect. Speaking of Kojima, many people say Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater as their favorite entry. My favorite Metal Gear Solid entry is Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty, but you would think, oh, better technology, people prefer Guns of the Patriots, Ground Zeroes, Phantom Pain, stuff like that, but no, Phantom Pain, people had issues with, feeling like the game went on for too long, and also the fact that open world isn't all that great, even if the actual stealth mechanics are pretty cool. Boss fights weren't the best, and stuff like that. They prefer MGS3. They prefer the jungle. They prefer the Cobra unit. They prefer the boss. They prefer Volgin. That's good on them. It's like how I don't care for the jungle. I don't care for the Cobra unit. And man, Volgin got plot armor up the ass. But it's like stuff like that, where it's like maybe people prefer that one. That's their favorite version, their favorite release of a Metal Gear Solid game, which is great for them, but just because something went better doesn't mean it was better. MGS4, oh, has issues with like chapter 3, I believe, being slow. The chapter 3 being slow, stuff like that. With the whole entire guy to sneak across all the way, looking across the place, like stuff like that. Or if chapter 2 has this war zone, but you don't really feel like the war zone really matters much to what you're doing whatsoever. It's by Otacons highlighting, hey, don't get involved in this whole entire war zone, stuff like that. So there's aspects of the game that just because technology is better doesn't necessarily mean that it is a better game. Another thing comes to video games as well is also scope. Sequels tend to try and increase the scope dramatically, trying to make things bigger and bigger and better. But also the fact that make things bigger, more things can slip through the crack and not be better. Like Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, such a big, expansive game, trying to do so much stuff with new technological wise of the Fuse system and stuff like that, but it can feel lacking in other aspects like the story or the depths, which aren't that interesting as entire locales, like Skyward Sword. We have an entire sky-filled game, but there's not much to do in the actual skies themselves, on top of there not being that many areas to go through. There's 3 main areas, compared to like Ocarina of Time, which tries to have dungeons at different locales, even though it's also not as big as Skyward Sword, but it's trying to make use of what it has. The Mass Effect franchise, where the first Mass Effect is, has way more RPG influence, stuff like that, has overheat mechanic for the gun instead of ammo, and the way it plays. But some people don't care much for that. Or the freaking Mako, we're able to go around on this little vehicle, go around. People find it awkward, but hey, can explore planets and stuff like that on foot. But some people didn't care for it and think, I like probing in Mass Effect 2. Or like the little spaceship travel in Mass Effect 3, you control a little ship and go try to avoid the Reapers trying to get you, stuff like that. Like some people prefer that, even though the Mako is the one that's technically more trying to be interesting technological wise, but some people don't care for it. How the series became more and more like a Gears of War kind of game as opposed to the original, which tried to have more RPG aspects. But people prefer Mass Effect 2 specifically as their favorite entry. And they don't really care much about Mass Effect 3 or Andromeda, which, once again, technological-wise, should be a better one, but Andromeda had so many issues when it first came out. Had so many problems, so technological-wise should have been better, but also because of technological-wise, let's try to make this bigger than it has to be, but also they couldn't make it bigger. I think also had engine issues, because the engine that wasn't designed for it as well, which is another thing. Try and make games with unfinished engines. Hello, Final Fantasy 13, Final Fantasy 15, trying to make entire games with engines that weren't done yet, which led to compromising the execution. So people care more about the what if, what could have been. Well, some games just try to use what they have. Like, yeah, Ocarina of Time is experimental because it was the one entire first time Zelda went 3D, but they want to make extra attention in order to make sure that it went 3D. Fix issues are also in Mario 64 had as well, so stuff like that. So I try to pretty much experiment one thing and then execute perfectly with the next one. So yeah, with the advent of higher technology means the advent of higher scope, and higher scope means more potential for issues to come arise, or issues that you may have replicate from a previous entry that you didn't really think to fix, or and when it be like a remake, remaster, sequel, sometimes issues carry over because some developers didn't think about that. So the higher the scope we go technology, the more for error there is when it comes to the entire thing. If it's a remake project, we're like, hey, the pacing is bigger. For a lot of people, it's way bigger. Other people, oh, it's bigger now the pacing is shot in the foot for a 33-hour game. Now it's to be told across 33-hour games across multiple generations. Which, yeah, bigger scope for other people, so they enjoy it. Other people, it feels like the scope is so big it doesn't know what to do with itself. This is the fact that some franchises are just held to a higher standard than others. Like the Sonic franchise held to a higher standard than Mario, where Sonic can have a bad narrative or not much of a narrative. People see that as a criticism, but Mario can have the exact same thing and people won't really bat an eye because they don't expect high quality narrative from Mario game, which Sonic has established itself as caring about its world and lore. So it becomes an issue for Sonic when that happens. So there's also that one aspect where why some people can prefer something simple for Sonic, like Sonic 3, Sonic Mania, or prefer something more, try to be more bigger and grander, like Sonic Adventure games, but then not liking when things try to be too grand, like Sonic Unleashed or Sonic Frontiers, stuff like that. But on the taste of the person. Like a lot of people say, oh, Sonic 2 is the best Sonic game, or oh, Sonic should never have gone 3D. It should be like 2.5D example, kind of thing. Which is different person, different stories, different folks. A lot of people, the best Mario game could be like Super Mario World, could be Mario 64, or for other people, it's Mario Galaxy. But there's a lot of things goes back and forth. Like, there aren't people say, oh, the best Mario game is Mario Odyssey, or Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury, for example, or the new Super Mario Bros. Series, which did revitalize the franchise for a bit, get the 2D entries, but other people prefer a different title than those, for a variety of reasons. Some people not like Cappy and Odyssey and the capture mechanic. Some people may not gel with Mario Galaxy's whole entire style, or the fact that it gets praised for having a single storybook, and apparently one of the best pieces of literature in all of gaming, and people have that little standard for Mario. That's not the point. Or Mario 64 because it was a pioneer in its field and people enjoy it, and may either be fine with some of the issues they had, or ignore the issues that it has, kind of thing. The issue of creativity. Developers don't want to generally do the same thing they've done the last time. They want to do something fresh. So because I want to do something fresh, because do something different, which means feedback from a previous entry may not necessarily fall to the next one. And look at the Zelda cycle. People complain about, oh, these Zelda games basically are too similar to each other, and people got bored. Breath of the Wild is something new and interesting, but also means feedback from, let's say, a Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword, doesn't really get folded into Breath of the Wild because it's so drastically different, so it needs different feedback, which they incorporate into Tears of the Kingdom with the fuse mechanic, with the depths, with the skies, and everything. Where I'm trying to make things different, more unique, trying to flesh out that game as a result. So the fact that execution means different feedback, like a criticism you can have for Final Fantasy IV may not necessarily carry into Final Fantasy V, or a Final Fantasy V criticism may necessarily carry into a Final Fantasy 16 or a 14, and stuff like that. So that's a whole other aspect of trying to keep things fresh means criticism you have for one entry may not go into the next one. Now you have a new set of criticism, but also a new set of praise because of new things. They could gel with it. So you didn't like before about a different entry, you could like about a new entry as well. But not necessarily universal. Sometimes one entry just had the best execution, and that's just the way it is. A big example is Dead Rising 4, where developers kept saying they were removing mechanics and aspects from the franchise because this is what the fans wanted. They lied through their fucking teeth. But I thought theoretically, this should be the Dead Rising fans that millions should have bought, because back in the day, people constantly said, oh, Dead Rising didn't have this, and this, aka things that made Dead Rising, then people would enjoy it more. And I have yet to see those millions of sales. Dead Rising 4, where are they? Where are the millions of sales people promised me? Where are they, huh? Where you at? You over there? You buy millions of Dead Rising 4? Where are you guys? See, where some things that some people say they didn't want, turns out that people are not interested, or maybe there's other aspects of Dead Rising 4 they don't care about as a result. So all in all, not every next entry or next game by a company needs to be like the best thing they've ever produced. But they just need to be good enough, hopefully good enough to be financial enough for the company to keep going. But not everything needs to be the best thing ever, especially since sometimes you end up creating a magnum opus where you don't even intend to, like people treated Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie and Yooka-Laylee. Yooka-Laylee wasn't as well liked as Kazooie and Tooie, but people do like Yooka-Laylee. It's getting a remaster to improve things, so that's good for that too. So that's one entire thing I want to mention. Like, not everything needs to be the best at everything, and just because some games from like years ago are like very well liked then this may it's a bad thing, especially since we don't really treat this for like film or books or music. And also, sometimes a company can have a one-hit wonder, and that's not actually a problem or issue with the actual game or product itself. Sometimes something special on people because your ideas don't mesh well, and sometimes ideas get appreciated way later and after the fact too. There's all that to account for. So it's fine that things that generally the most popular things generally stuff from years ago. But it's just those things that had time to sizzle for people to enjoy, including more generations to enjoy. Another thing is also look at console gimmicks, everything. Nowadays, there's not really much separate the consoles for the features, but like even the features they have, companies either don't use because they don't know how to get a good use out of it, or because it's not worth the development research trying to figure it out. Like, oh, here's the Switch 2. What do we got? Oh, the Joy-Cons have IR sensors that they won't use and didn't. HD Rumble, improved vibration that also didn't get much use out of it. With some games, I believe it was Octopath Traveler specifically, citing how they didn't use it much because it get annoying if it were overused, which, you know, kind of says a lot about your new gimmick if developers are like, this will become annoying on the player if we use it too much. Or even stuff like the DualSense. Ooh, we have a microphone on the controller. Okay, it's convenient on the microphone, but like, what does that really add? I mean, Or, oh, we have speakers on the controller. Great, the Wii did that, and the Wii also didn't do much with that, since most games just use it for conversations, but like, what's there to have a conversation coming on a controller, coming on a TV? The answer is, coming out of the TV, you're probably saving your batteries more. Or adaptive triggers, which also like more interaction, more immersion, be more immersed. Like I don't want my controller fighting back against me. Like, these are features that just turn off because like no one really uses much of anything with it. So it becomes more awkward for the sake of having them. Like, doesn't feel like how back in the day, analog sticks, that was a big new thing to add. The general idea vibration, that's a big newer thing. But nowadays, like, they don't have any idea of direction what to do with this. The Wii U Gamepad probably had the most potential of what companies could do with it, and they just either use it for basic features because you come up with an idea, or games that did try to use it creatively generally didn't get that much attention because they're sadly on the Wii U. So there's stuff like that. Even Nintendo themselves dropped the feature as well for various reasons. Same with the 3DS. 3D gimmick, great. We're not using that. It ruins the frame rate and kills the battery. Which kind of says a lot about newer technology, that they can't really find a way to really use it much to the games, and we're still relying on the stuff we basically established like N64 PS1 era, actually. Kind of one of those weird things people don't really talk about, but that's a whole different tangent about my gripe with getting controllers and features not being used, made them more expensive. But like, another thing, advancement technology, trying to push new innovation in gaming, but don't really do much. Even motion controls, we don't really do much with that anymore. We kept gyro, because gyro is useful, but like, even Switch is like, hey, here are options for motion controls, but here are options without them in case you don't want them, kind of thing. Even Switch 2, and people saying the mouse feature on the Joy-Cons 2 will be a big revolutionary device. No, they won't, because history has shown companies will just drop it and pretend it doesn't exist. So, it's kind of a thing where big advancements that really benefit gaming kind of already happen. Now they just don't really have much of an idea of what to do with what they currently have, either adding features for the sake of having them, or developers themselves just see this idea and go, what do you want to do with this? You know, kind of one of those things about when it comes to innovation in consoles, where straight up one of the most praised new features within the PS4 Xbox One era of now you can share your clips online much easier and record stuff. Like, I mean, it's a pretty good feature, but like, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, that's one of the highest praised features in like recent years of gaming for a new feature on a console. Last thing I'll note is also really it comes down to execution, just because of down of things being too different. Like, you have certain fan bases, let's say Persona, Fire Emblem, or also Final Fantasy, where the franchise became so different over the years to the point where no matter how good a new entry could be, you'll still have people who would prefer it if they hit the go back button. Not necessarily saying franchises have that, but I will say a case like say Persona, people like newer entries, but there are people who wish to go back to the earlier ones. Say you have Fire Emblem, where should have more highly rated titles are more like the latter side, the more recent ones, but there are people who wish to go back, and it doesn't mean the games are bad. It just means people have the preference of, hey, I preferred how this used to be before, and wish we did this, even if they made themselves like it or not like it because it's too different. So there's a tactic to take into account when it comes to moving forward technology. Things may not always improve, or sometimes things are just not necessarily better or worse, they're just different. And different in a way where some people are like, I prefer what you did before. Now that's a final note. Alright then, good day. Go out, play games. For any extra consideration that you prefer. Play classics, play modern titles. It's your choice. Whatever you like.